Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and privilege to sum up the debate as a whole. We've heard a lot of things today, but I want to summarize this debate under two headings. I'm going to talk about quantifiable benefits and non-quantifiable benefits. And before I go into that, I want to briefly look into how we perceive wealth and what kind of components we have in wealth. We've heard a lot about economics and economic well-being and economic growth, etc. And that's looking at wealth in a rather narrow perspective. That's only sort of accounting for how many jobs we have, if we can have food on the table, etc. And on our side of the house, we brought up a lot of wealth-related issues which are not directly quantifiable, such as the right to decide what happens to our lives close to us, the subsidiarity principle of democracy, to have the right to influence decisions close to us where they happen, which we are losing. Now, looking at these two sort of themes in this debate from the perspective of different kinds of wealth, we've heard a lot of simple economic arguments. Now, just to recap, we don't doubt that this will be good for corporations. That's why they want this whole deal. But we're questioning to what extent this wealth for the corporations is trickling down to society as a whole and eventually to the individual. And to do that, we have governments that regulate to ensure that these corporations don't abuse the rights they have towards the environment, towards health issues, towards gene-manipulated foods, etc. We make sure that wealth that they are gathering is becoming part of us. Now, they claim from the proposition that this is not about deregulation. However, we've already heard several examples where regulation would indeed be lessened. I don't have time to go through them again. But on the other hand, we've heard that regulations are problems, that we need to get rid of them. And yes, that might be the case, but they are suggesting that we should reduce the regulations by a third-party super-governmental body which is outside the parliamentary decision-making process and as far as possible from our local democracies as possible. And we find that to be a big problem when it comes to acquiring this economic wealth. Furthermore, we've heard concrete examples of how corporations can threaten public officials when they try to introduce regulations that will have concrete economical disadvantages because governments must engage in costly arbitration processes. So we don't see that that is good either. Now, what we also see is that while this is sort of targeting specifically government regulations, we see that US and EU has different problems here. Like the legal problems of entering the US and EU market are somewhat different. The EU has strong government regulations, but the US does not in some areas. What you have there is a legal culture of arbitration. So while you're not being sort of sideline of your investment by the government, what you are facing is a very hostile legal environment which is very problematic to enter. And furthermore, and lastly on this, we see this actually being against the free market because it will be very unfair for small companies and domestic companies and national companies who can't engage and use this super governmental body to their advantages for arbitration. Yes.
So if you think that, if you're against the principle of subsidiarity, why do you think we have the European Union?
We have the European Union because that still is somehow linked to our local democracies, however weakly, and we're saying we shouldn't go further in that direction of removing the power from our local democracies even further than this would do. But getting into the meat of the matter, like, even if there would be concrete economic, in a very narrow way, benefits, we're claiming that the loss of other values and wealth is too great. We think that ISDS is understanding wealth only a narrow perspective. Let me give you an example. They want to allow corporations to sue governments if they withdraw investments. But what about protecting consumers and protecting consumer privacy rights, for example? Are we going to come up with a common framework of values that prevents governments from acquiring private information from from private companies under the Patriot Act, for example. So we see that this comes down to it being unfair, being simply putting there those principles and those government values that are prevalent in the US, but we don't see it being a two-way street. We would like to have privacy protection under this framework as well, but we don't see that being discussed at the moment, and we think it's highly unlikely it would be in the future as well. So, what have we talked about today? We don't doubt that this probably will be beneficial for corporations in the long run. What we are questioning is whether that benefit, that narrow economic benefit for the corporations will translate into tangible wealth benefits, both from a pure economic perspective and by still having our sort of right to effect decisions close to us and the right to privacy in companies like